in the stillness of the night, an eerie silence descends upon the house. A house that has seen better days, its once vibrant paint now faded, its walls whispering tales of an age long past. Nestled within this relic of a bygone era, our protagonist lies fast asleep, oblivious to the world outside. Suddenly, an abrupt noise shatters the tranquility. The protagonist awakens, heart pounding like a drum, eyes darting wildly in the darkness. A strange feeling gnaws at his senses, a feeling that he is not alone. Goosebumps prickle his skin as an inexplicable chill seems to permeate the room, seeping into his very bones. He sits up, straining his ears to catch any semblance of sound, but all he hears is the deafening quiet, broken intermittently by the creaking of the old house, as if it, too, is echoing his fear. His gaze roams around the room, attempting to pierce the inky blackness. The scant moonlight filtering through the threadbare curtains does little to alleviate his growing unease. His mind races, conjuring up images of specters and phantoms, fueling his dread. He tries to shake off the irrational fear, telling himself it's just his imagination playing tricks. But the nagging sensation of being watched refuses to leave him. It's as if a pair of eyes are fixated on him, invisible yet penetrating, observing his every move. The air grows denser, the chill more pronounced. He wraps his arms around himself, trying to ward off the cold, but it's not just the temperature that's unsettling him. It's the feeling of being prey, the sensation of being hunted by something unseen, unknown. The clock on the wall ticks away, each second stretching into an eternity. He feels the minutes slipping by, the tension mounting, the suspense growing thicker with each passing moment. He dares not move, dares not breathe too loudly, lest he disturb whatever lurks in the shadows. Unsettled, the protagonist dared not close his eyes again, for fear of what might be lurking in the shadows. And so he stays awake, waiting for dawn, waiting for light to chase away the darkness and the fear it brings along. In the pitch-black room, the only sound was the protagonist's own heartbeat thudding loudly in his ears. As his eyes strained to pierce the inky darkness, a sense of unease began to creep over him, subtle as a shadow, but just as disquieting. He sat frozen, his senses heightened, his skin prickling with a dread he couldn't quite explain. The silence of the room was suddenly pierced by a sound, a distant creaking, like old floorboards groaning under unseen weight. It was a sound that shouldn't exist in this closed room, this sealed sanctuary. It was a sound that echoed through the darkness, bouncing off the unseen walls and filling the room with an eerie melody of fear. A chill swept through the room, a frigid breeze that made his skin break out in goosebumps. It rustled the curtains, it whispered through the gaps, it danced around him, a chilling waltz in this ballroom of fear. But there were no windows, no doors left ajar. There was no logical source for this chilling draft. His heart pounded faster, each beat echoing the tick-tock of a sinister clock. His breath hitched, caught in the vice of fear that tightened around his throat. His palms were clammy, his body rigid, a statue caught in the grip of terror. The creaking grew louder, more insistent. The chill became more pronounced, wrapping him in its icy embrace. The room seemed to close in on him, the unseen walls pressing closer, the darkness growing thicker, the silence more oppressive. As the minutes ticked by, his fear morphed into terror. Every creak, every whisper of the breeze, every thud of his heart seemed to echo in the darkness, a haunting symphony of fear. He could feel it, a presence, unseen yet palpable, lurking in the shadows of the room. With every passing moment, the presence felt more tangible, more threatening. It was there, in the room, hidden in the darkness. It was watching him, feeding off his fear, growing stronger with each beat of his terrified heart. It was an unseen presence, a night visitor in this symphony of horror. Suddenly a cold whisper drifted through the room, a name, his name. The air seemed to clutch at his throat, each breath becoming a struggle as the temperature plummeted. It was as if winter had invaded the room, the chill seeping into his bones, making him shiver uncontrollably. He strained his ears, desperate to hear that whisper again. The silence seemed to mock him, the quiet so profound that he could hear his own heart pounding. Then, as if answering his silent plea, it came again, a soft, icy whisper, his name carried on a gust of freezing air. The sound slithered around the room, wrapping itself around him, leaving him no escape from the chilling truth. His heart pounded like a drum in his chest, each beat echoing the rhythm of his name. The whisper was not just a sound, it was a presence, an entity that knew him, knew his name. It was as if the room itself had come alive, whispering his name with a breath that was colder than death itself. His body was rooted to the spot, his skin prickling with goosebumps. He could feel it, the unmistakable sensation of someone standing just behind him. The room was empty, yet it was not. He was alone, yet he was not. The paradox was maddening, pushing him to the edge of sanity. The chill was numbing, the whisper relentless. His name echoed around the room, each repetition more insistent than the last. The whisper was not just a sound anymore. It was a declaration, a statement of fact. He was not alone in the room. His breath hitched in his throat, the realization hitting him like a punch. The whisper, the chill, the presence behind him, they all pointed to one shattering truth. He was not alone. He was never alone. His room, his sanctuary was invaded by something. Someone else. Frozen with fear, he could not deny the truth anymore. He was not alone. Gathering every ounce of courage, he turned around to face his night visitor. The room was filled with an unearthly chill, as if the very air had been sucked away, replaced by a cold that seemed to seep into his bones. The silence was deafening, yet in that silence there was a voice that seemed not to come from the room but from someplace far away, a place of shadows and fear. It was a voice that was cold, lifeless, devoid of any human warmth. It echoed in the room, bouncing off the walls, filling the space with its haunting resonance. He could feel it not just in his ears but in his very soul, each word like a shard of ice piercing his heart. It was a voice that spoke of things beyond his understanding, of darkness and despair, of a world beyond the veil of reality. He could feel it, an invisible touch, like the caress of an icy hand on his skin. It sent shivers down his spine, each touch a stark reminder of the unseen entity that was with him in the room. It was a touch that was as light as a feather, yet as heavy as a mountain, a touch that was as cold as the deepest winter, yet as burning as the hottest flame. The pacing was slow, deliberate, each word, each touch designed for maximum effect. It was as if time itself had slowed down, each second stretching into an eternity. The room was filled with a sense of dread, a sense of impending doom. Yet despite the fear, despite the terror, he stood his ground. He could feel his body shaking, each tremor a testament to the fear that gripped his heart. Yet he did not move, did not run. He stood there, in the face of the unknown, his body shaking uncontrollably. In the face of the unknown, he stood his ground, his body shaking uncontrollably. As dawn approached, the presence began to fade, leaving behind a bone-chilling silence. The room that moments ago had been filled with an unseen terror was now returning to its usual, mundane self. The air, once thick with dread, began to thin, the oppressive weight lifting. The protagonist could finally breathe a sigh of relief, though it was a shaky one. The silence, previously a source of unease, was now a welcomed friend. It was a silence that screamed of survival, of the night's ordeal drawing to a close. But it was also a deceptive silence, as it couldn't fully mask the lingering traces of fear. The room was still, yet the protagonist's heart continued to hammer in his chest, a grim reminder of the terror he had just endured. His mind raced, trying to make sense of the night's events. The fear was still raw, and it would take some time for him to process it all. He wondered if he would ever be able to sleep peacefully again, or if every creak of the house, every whisper of the wind, would remind him of this night. But there was also a sense of relief. He had faced the unseen, the unknown, and had lived to tell the tale. He had stared into the abyss, and though it had stared back, he had not faltered, he had not run. He had faced his fear, and for that he was proud. Yet, as the sun began to rise, casting its warm rays into the room, he couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. The room was back to normal, the terror of the night seemingly a distant memory. But he knew better. He knew that the night wasn't just a figment of his imagination. It was real, it was terrifying, and it was unforgettable. That night, he became a believer of the unseen, of the night visitors that lurk in the shadows, a night he would never forget.